resist the urge to think that because the problems are so big and we humans are so seemingly small, resist the urge to do nothing. Forget being a consequentialist. Do what's right because it's the right thing to do, even if it seems like doing it would have little consequence. That's the advice I give to my 21-year-old students and advice I would give to myself were I in their shoes today. I've written about this in a couple of my books. I have a dialogue I wrote about consequentialism and why we ought not be consequentialists. Think that the moral worth of an action is found only in its consequences. We ought to simply do the right thing. Follow Jesus, follow all the saints who said to heck with the consequences. I'll leave those to God, and I'm simply going to do what God is calling me to do and be a faithful disciple, follower of Jesus as best I can.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Go to shiftingculturepodcast.com to interact and donate. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes come out each week. And go leave a rating and review. It's easy. It only takes a second, and it helps us find new listeners to the show. Just go to the show page on the app that you're using and hit 5 stars. It really is that easy. Thank you so much. Previous guests on the show have included Lucy Pepiot, Chris Watkin, and Justin Bailey. You can go back, listen to those amazing episodes and more. But today's guest is Steve Bouma-Prediger. He is the Leonard Marjorie Mass Professor of Reformed Theology at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and the Director of the Environmental Studies minor. A graduate of Hope College, his Ph.D. is in Religious Studies from the University of Chicago. His most recent book is Creation Care Discipleship: Why Earthkeeping is an Essential Christian Practice. When he is not teaching, he's spending most of his time canoeing or backpacking in his favorite places in North America, or simply hiking among the magnificent trees in Southwest Michigan parks. Steve and I have a great discussion on creation, earthkeeping, and our role in caring for the earth as disciples of Jesus. Since the Bible starts and ends with rivers and trees, our first mandate is to care for the earth, and our vision of the future includes the earth we are now living on. We have a role and responsibility in the way that we keep the earth, care for it, and pattern our life. What are the things we could do in our everyday lives to be good earth keepers? Who is working on the major problems of the earth at the moment? How is social justice tied to ecological issues? We tackle these questions and more. So join us as we discover our role as earth keepers, as disciples of Jesus. Here's my conversation with Steve Bouma-Prediger.
All right, Steve, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me. I'm excited to have you on.
Great. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'd love to really start out a little bit of your story of how you got into recognizing that the creation mandate and caring for creation is important. It's something that God has called us to. And so where did your love of the earth and creation starts, and how did it dovetail into seeing it as part of our duty to care for God's world?
It's a great question, and I'll try to keep it short. It seems like an earlier life, 25, 30 years ago, I started leading wilderness backpacking, canoeing, rock climbing trips for the Reformed Church in America, the denomination that I'm a part of and belong to. Did that for 4 summers with a number of other cohorts in crime, co-instructors. We led trips in the Front Range of the Rockies, all over Michigan, Boundary Waters Canoeing Wilderness, one of our favorite paddling spots up in northeastern Minnesota, Adirondacks. So I sort of fell into it by love of creation by leading these trips all summer. And then in graduate school, I took absolutely no courses on ecological issues or the intersection of theology and environment until I got to my doctoral work at the University of Chicago. And I focused my vocation as a teacher scholar, put that in harmony with my avocation as a backpacker and canoeist and so on. So my doctoral dissertation turned into my first book called The Greening of Theology, where I looked at three contemporary Christian thinkers, Rosemary Radford Ruther, Joseph Sittler, and Jürgen Moltmann, and wrote a very long dissertation and a little bit shorter book on the intersection of Christian theology and ethics and ecological issues. This was back in the 90s. So, and ever since then, that's sort of been my trajectory as a scholar. I've got, 7 or 8 books now, all of them on ecological topics. Shameless plug here for my most recent book, Creation Care Discipleship, just came out, Why Earthkeeping is an Essential Christian Practice. So for the last 30 or so years, I've been focusing as a teacher and scholar on ecological theology and ethics from a Christian point of view. So again, my interest in being outdoors and backpacking, canoeing, and the like, and my scholarly focus have more or less coincided. I've read all kinds of parts of the Bible that I did not know existed growing up in a Baptist church as a kid. I've learned that the Bible begins and ends with rivers and trees, for example. The first 2 chapters of Genesis, the last 2 chapters of the book of Revelation. I've never heard a sermon on that. I've preached those sermons, but I've never heard another sermon pointing out how the Bible begins with rivers and trees and all these other wonderful texts in between the book of Genesis and the book of Revelation. So that's the short version of how I got into this this business of teaching and writing about God's creation and our care for it.
So if the Bible starts and ends with rivers and trees, that's great. We have an ending, we have a beginning, but we're here in the middle of it. And so what is our part? How does the first 2 chapters of Genesis play into what we're seeing today and what we're called to do?
Well, that's a great question. Again, in Genesis 1 and 2, among other things, we learn not only about the world in which we live, creation, but we learn that our calling as humans, made in the image of God, fancy Latin term imago Dei, that we're called to serve and protect. We're not only made in God's image, Genesis 1, 26 through 28, we're also called to serve and protect creation. It's Genesis 2:15, to avad and shamar. May the Lord bless you and keep you, the great Aaronic blessing from the book of Numbers. The same Hebrew word is used in Genesis 2. We're called to preserve and protect the world. That's our calling as humans, not just as Christians, but as humans. We often focus on we're made in God's image, called to have dominion and rule and exercise dominion over the earth. That's Genesis 1, but we forget about Genesis 2, its next door neighbor. I think being called to have dominion means serving and protecting. So are we good at that calling? No, clearly we're not, given the various degradations of the earth that we experience these days, whether it's polluted air, polluted water, species extinction rates, etc. Nevertheless, our calling as humans is to care for creation. And again, unlike what I was taught growing up, the earth is not going to be destroyed and burned up to nothing. That's not what the Bible teaches. Those last 2 chapters in Revelation talk about the New Jerusalem coming down to earth. And our eschatology, our view of the future, is an earth-affirming view. The earth will be purified by that fire, not destroyed. And 2 Peter 3:10, another famous passage often mistranslated, the earth and all the works upon it will not burn up to nothing, but they will be discovered. Literally, eurythesetai, they'll be found. We're not looking at the earth burning up to nothing. We ought to care for it because in God's good future, our good future, will be in some sort of heaven and earth brought together. And that's the vision that's described in Revelation and elsewhere in the New Testament. So our view of the future is of an earth-affirming future, and so we can't use the Bible as an excuse or reason to say it's all going to hell in a handbasket. We don't need to care for it. We are called to care for it and called to live out God's good future in our present life.
Why do you think that modern Christians in some circles have forgotten that we are still called in this mandate to serve and protect the earth?
That is the $64 million question. It's, all good questions, but that one in particular, you and everyone else whom I talk with eventually ask that question. Why is it that the church, that we, the body of Christ, have not have not taken this seriously. Well, and I think, again, I appeal to my own experience growing up in a dispensationalist, conservative Baptist church and being a proud evangelical, traveling a lot and speaking to and with evangelical folk. One, we've ignored those passages. Two, we have misinterpreted or misunderstood them. Again, I emphasized or talked about how we focused on Genesis 1, being made in God's image, called to rule and exercise dominion. We've forgotten Genesis 2:15. Our eschatology, our view of the future, has been an escapist eschatology. We're going to escape the earth, so why care for it? So that's one reason why in my writing, I focused on the Bible. That new book I showed you has a whole chapter on what we can learn about the Bible. And I, as an evangelical, I say, I basically, meeting with evangelicals, so we say we take the Bible seriously as God's word. Well, let's take a look at some passages that maybe you're not familiar with. What does the Bible say? And the Christian tradition itself, Roman Catholic, all forms of Protestant, each of them in their own way, have people not just like Francis of Assisi, it was his feast day just a few days ago, but other folks too who you can point to who were earthkeepers in their own way. But we don't, not only do we not know well what the Bible teaches, we don't know much about our own traditions. People old and contemporary who were earthkeepers, again, in their own way. And I'll add the last part is, we can't take care of something well unless we know how it works, whether it's the car we drive or the house we own or the yard we mow. And I find among not just my students, but Sunday school classes, I just taught one the other day, Sunday, that there's a high degree of ecological illiteracy. We don't know where our water comes from or where our garbage goes. If we don't know those kinds of things, we're not going to be very well prepared to take care of our home planet. So one of the things I try to do in my teaching and in writing is to try to increase ecological literacy. Where does your local water come from? And where does your garbage go? Where's away? We say we throw things away. There is no away. There is no such place called away. It's a garbage dump somewhere. Well, where's that going? How much of it's being recycled, et cetera. So we need to increase our ecological literacy if we're going to responsibly care for our home planet.
Mm. So you say in your book, your book is titled Creation Care Discipleship. So
Right.
What is that look like, that discipleship part look like? I think a lot of people think a discipleship is following in the ways of Jesus and following his commands, walking in his ways. And so where does discipleship come in with creation care?
Well, a number of different ways. One is, I think at least evangelicals and most other Christians would agree that if you're going to be a serious follower of Jesus, you need to read the Bible. And we just talked about that, various places in the Bible, including the New Testament. But also another side of this is Jesus tells us, if nothing else, that there's this great commandment. He redefines the Torah, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and being, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, a lot of our neighbors are struggling, are hurting because of not just social injustices of various sorts, racism, sexism, name your ism, but because their water's polluted, their air's polluted, because of various ecological degradations. So, one way of caring for and loving our neighbor is to improve the health of our home planet. So often we see social justice issues separate. We consider those different from so-called environmental or ecological issues, when in fact, you scratch one, you almost always find another. And all the social justice issues I've ever worked on, going back to seminary and Fuller Seminary 25, 30 years ago now, issues of homelessness, of hunger, poverty, they're almost always related to issues, so-called environmental issues, and vice versa. Again, scratch the surface about air pollution, which was a big issue and still is in Southern California. Water pollution, where do you get your water? That's also an issue in Southern California and lots of other places on the planet. Not so much here in Michigan, where 20% of the Earth's surface fresh water is in the Great Lakes. We're not worried about water, but lots of other people on our planet are. So you find those issues, again, interconnected. And increasingly that's being realized or acknowledged by people Christians of all sorts, including evangelicals. So caring for your neighbor includes caring for creation, if you're going to take that seriously.
So if I have my eyes open, I'm like, okay, now we need to take care of creation and take care of our neighbors, and they coalesce together. They're tied together. For an individual or even a small community group, it feels like a daunting task because it's a complex issue. You have to go all the way back upstream to figure out the causes of all these things. So you can't just put a Band-Aid on something at the tail end of it. We have to go back and solve that. As we are living in our neighborhoods, as we're caring for our neighbors, what can we do just as a small group of people to actually invoke change and care for the earth?
Great question. You're on a roll here. And this is where the rubber hits the road, or it doesn't. I mean, what concretely, practically can and should we do to take these issues seriously? Well, the first thing, I'll borrow a line from Katharine Hayhoe, perhaps our most well-known climate scientist, who is an evangelical Christian, married to a evangelical pastor preacher. The first thing is to realize that you're not just one person. Just talk about this issue with your neighbors, with the people at church. I mean, one of the biggest questions I get is precisely the one you just mentioned. What these problems are so huge, so seemingly intractable. What can little old me do? What can one person do? And my response, and Catherine's and lots of others, is stop being one person. Find your people. You're not the only person probably at church or at work or in your neighborhood who's concerned about these issues. So join with at least 1 or 2 or 8 or 10 other people. Probably there's a local group of some sort dealing with one of these issues or both of them. Around here, it's the Outdoor Discovery Center, McIntyre Area Greenway, Community Action House. There are a variety of organizations dealing with one or other of these issues in my local community. In most other communities, there are such organizations. Join them. Again, stop being one person and stop thinking or being tempted to think that little old you can do nothing. So we need to realize that we're agents and we have agency. We have power and ability to make changes. And will my, conserving water or picking up trash in my local neighborhood solve global climate change? No. But those are seemingly small things that I can do and that lots of other people can do to make my part of God's good earth a little better. And yes, we need to work together globally to deal with those big problems, but don't allow those large problems to steal you from your agency, from feeling like you can really do something, because you can. None of us know, what seemingly little thing we might do might have huge consequences, positive consequences for good. Did Martin Luther King Jr. and all the folks back at the beginning of the civil rights movement, did they, think that if not going to the back of the bus, refusing to go to the back of the bus was going to change the world? I doubt it. But it did, They did the right thing by not going to the back of the bus, in this case, the civil rights movement, and look what happened. So do the right thing. Forget dealing with the consequences, thinking the consequences are so minimal, I'm not going to do it. Leave the consequences to God. You never know what wild and crazy things God might do with some seemingly little thing we do. Simply do the right thing, whether, again, it's with respect to so-called social justice issues, or in this case, especially creation care issues. And again, Katharine Hayhoe's advice is sound. Find your people. Find other people. To stop being one person, join with other people in your local community, church, etc., who are interested in being earthkeepers and doing the practical things that we can do, that we don't need to wait for some large political organization while we're engaging in that kind of activity. Nevertheless, I don't have to wait until the Michigan State House or Senate passes some creation care law to pick up the trash on my walk home tonight, or turn the lights off in my office so we don't use as much electricity. There are lots of those little things we can do that don't require some politician somewhere saying yes.
Yeah, and I think, Jesus talked a lot in his parables about ecological issues, and he compared the kingdom of God to a mustard seed that would then grow into this large tree. He talked the parable of the soils, where, the fourth soil produces good fruit, and then the thorny soil and the rocky soil don't. He talks a lot about those things as a comparison to the kingdom of God. Can you tell us then, how does the earth work? How does creation work? Because Jesus seemed to know how it works through his parables of the kingdom, and he's trying to illuminate something for us today. So how do these small little things, these small little seeds, actually produce a large effect, like Jesus is saying in his parables?
Yeah, that's a great point. I just emphasize that if a fair reading of the Gospels and Jesus in particular, and especially, as you point out, very insightfully, his parables indicate that he was a pretty ecologically literate guy. I mean, yeah, he knew about how a lot of this stuff in the natural world worked. And there's a example right there. If we are to engage in the imitation of Christ, then we ought to be a little more ecologically literate. Well, he's pointing to some of the things that I think are some of the basic learnings from ecology, the study of the house in which we live, the logos of the oikos. That's where eco comes from. Greek word, it means our home planet. Couple of things come to mind. One is that we live on a finite planet. Except for the light streaming in from our star, the sun, there's only so much stuff. And so we often live, at least we in the United States, as if there's an infinite supply of goods out there, whether it's food or clothing or whatever, but that's simply not the case. And so acknowledging our finitude, I think, is an important start. But the Bible goes beyond that. We're not just finite, we're fallible. I mean, from Genesis 3 on, it's a story of sin and redemption after the narratives of creation. So we need to acknowledge, and this is going beyond much of the secular environmental world, which acknowledges finitude. But we Christians need to acknowledge our fallibility, our sinfulness, the fact that we screw things up more often than we would like. We disobey God and God's commandments to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourself. And so I think that's a good piece of it too. Back to the ecology, well, things are finite, but they're also in this constant flow and flux. Things change. That's another basic learning from ecology. There are ecological systems, all different scales, from the grass and the insects on your lawn to major large ecosystems. And some of that change is good, but some of it isn't, and partly because we're not doing as good a job as we should as humans, caring for creation, serving and protecting it. So, and the sense not just that all things are interconnected, but that they're interdependent. Interrelated is one thing, but interdependent is something else. I mean, the oxygen in our lungs right now comes from all those green things. I'm looking at some green plants outside my office window here and looking at the pine grove in the middle of our campus. So, all those green plants take in our waste gas, carbon dioxide, and produce oxygen for us and all the other creatures that need it. So there's this complex interdependent system that we need to learn more about, again, if we're going to take better care of creation and be earthkeeping Christians. So there's a whole bunch of just sort of basic science we need to learn in order to, again, if I'm trying to repair my car, I need to know how it works, the transmission, the engine, etc. Same thing when it comes to my neighborhood, the planet on which we live. We need to have a basic understanding of some of these central ecological principles.
I know back in Yellowstone, the wolves were taken out of the ecosystem. Things started to die a little bit. They were re-engaged into the ecosystem, and things started to flourish. So what do you think our role as humans in an ecosystem? How much are we, in the beginning, how much are we to subdue or take dominion? And what's our role in it? Do we just let things go, or do we actually care? How do we navigate that?
That is, again, another really important practical question. And you mentioned one of the most well-known examples of how we can screw things up and how we can serve and protect in ways that make things better. Taking wolves out of their natural habitat isn't just bad for the wolves, it's bad for that whole ecosystem, as we now know. So again, that means we can't just sit back and just let everything be. No, we're called to serve and protect, which means, especially since we've screwed some things up, we need to, again, learn how things work in different ecosystems and work to make it healthier, a healthy ecosystem. And that means that predation of some sort is probably a good idea. Predation is a natural feature of that particular part of the earth.
Yeah.
Again, going back to Yellowstone, you take away one of the top predators, all kinds of bad things happen, things that aren't meant to be in balance. Again, that emphasizes our need to become ecologically literate about wherever we live and learn about the different roles that we humans play, which again goes against the grain of what kind of one of the main American traditions, which is wilderness. You just leave things be. When we get humans out of there, well, no, we humans need to serve and protect areas, which means often cases we are intervening in certain ways. I mean, we have in fact intervened, whether knowingly or not, and so we need to figure out how we can do that better. And that means, taking care of plants, animals, larger ecosystems, their home places in ways that will, as best we can discern, using our best science, what will make this place and all of its creatures flourish. That's a huge task. It requires a lot of collective effort and, again, knowledge of how the world works as we take our God-given mandate to be image bearers of God, serving as Jesus served for the greater good. As we take that mandate seriously, we need to know what we're doing. And often in the past, we didn't know what we were doing, or we thought we could just do anything we wanted and whatever happens, let it happen, So anyway, that's a really important point, taking up the mandate to be God's image bearers in ways that ensure the flourishing of all creation.
One of the things that you write about in your book, you write about how you believe that stewardship is not the right word when it comes to caring for creation, just because we don't have a good understanding of what that actually means. But so you propose earthkeeping as a word. So why the difference? Why is stewarding the earth something that's not as helpful these days, and why is earthkeeping, you think, more helpful?
That's a great question. That was the topic of my talk a couple of days ago at the BioLogos Creation Care Summit in Grand Rapids. That was my particular paper or talk. And it's a controversial, and rightly so, controversial topic. For some people, stewardship means caring for creation. It does. But when I especially teach Sunday school classes in random churches, not just here in Michigan, but elsewhere, and ask for a show of hands on word association, what's the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word stewardship? A vast majority, 80, 90% of the people in these classes say it's giving your time, talent, and treasures to the church in terms of money, typically. It's about offering on Sunday morning. And if it's not money, again, it's time or talent to give to the church. And some of that might have to do with earthkeeping, but most of it doesn't. It's, serving the church in all the other ways that we need to serve the church, serving in offices as elders and deacons and so on. So the de facto understanding of stewardship in many evangelical churches, especially, I think, has nothing to do primarily with caring for creation. For some people it does, but again, some folks have written that we need to retire the term stewardship when it comes to talking about caring for creation. Creation care is a better term. I think earthkeeping is a better term because creation is pretty big. If we take that literally, if you mean just planet Earth, okay, but creation literally means something much, much bigger than planet Earth. And I don't think we're called as Earth beings to care for what's going on in some other planet or solar system somewhere else. That's kind of crazy. It's not our job. Maybe there's some other creatures God created to take care of that part of the universe. So creation care seems a little too haughty to, really creation, where Earth is, there's no doubt about what the Earth is. And keeping it, again, is tying in or going back to that verb in Genesis 2:15. We are called to avad and shamar. So it has that kind of biblical image. Earthkeeping, the term was invented way back in 1980. The book co-authored and edited by Lauren Wilkinson, a group of scholars who met together, and that book is now came out in a second edition about 10 or 15, 20 years ago now. So I didn't invent the term, but I've liked it ever since I heard it because it is, I think, a better alternative, more accurate alternative of and rendering of what the Bible teaches. It's not care of all creation, but it's beyond simply giving money to the church. Both of those are important. But earthkeeping, I think, captures that kind of biblical responsibility we humans have to serve and protect as best we can the home planet on which we live.
Yeah, language is important. We need to know what we're talking about. If you're using a term and somebody thinks it means one thing, but you actually mean another thing, it's not helpful for anybody. And so it's good. It's a more precise term and more what the Bible is teaching us to do is to keep the earth, to take care of it. So I liked it. I think it's good.
Well, preach it, brother. There are only a few of us who think that. Apparently, I get feedback everywhere I go on that point. Now I say, hey, if by stewardship that means for you what I mean by earthkeeping,
exactly,
do it.
Yep.
If that gets more people out there, caring for creation, wonderful. But for most people, especially more conservative Christians, stewardship pretty much means tithing and money to the church, and that's not important as that is. That's not what I mean by earthkeeping.
Earlier we talked about what we could do as individuals or small groups of people to help have earthkeeping in our communities, do the little things so that then who knows, maybe big things will then happen. Is there anybody out there that you're excited about that is working on these big issues on the background, that they're doing some large work that you think is having an effect or will have an effect on our environment?
Yeah, there is. And the one that immediately comes to mind is the Evangelical and Environmental Network, EEN, founded way back in 1994 and 95. I'm proud to say I had a hand in getting that organization going way back when. And it's doing things by, as the name implies, trying to gather together self-identified evangelical Christians, especially in North America, to think about caring for creation, earthkeeping, whatever you want to call it, stewardship in this broader sense. And where's her book? Yeah, I just heard Cy Montgomery, who is currently now is working with the Evangelical Environmental Network. Really good author. She's got about 30 books. This is one of her recent books of Time and Turtles, Mending the World, Shell by Shattered Shell. She was one of the plenary speakers at the Biologos event. And she would be someone whose writings and podcasts and so on, as an evangelical Christian, would you want to follow. A lot of the folks who were involved 20, 30 years ago with the founding of EEN have moved on. Some of them are now dead, but that organization's been around. It still has a website, and there are people in lots of states and cities who have connections to that coalition of evangelical Christians who want to focus on caring for creation. I'm part of some secular organizations, Wilderness Society, Sierra Club, etc. And again, it's one way of, if you're a Christian in that organization, a lot of people in those groups often think that Christians don't care about creation. And when they finally meet someone who does, it's a kind of evangelistic impulse without really trying very hard, right? You find out, why do you care for creation? Because I'm a Christian. They kind of look at you funny, their jaw drops, and you say, didn't you know that Christians care for creation? So there's a kind of missiological or even evangelical job for us to do in these secular organizations where the reputation of Christians being caretakers is pretty low. It's really, they think Christian earthkeeper is an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp or, other famous examples. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And again, local organizations I'm involved with, again, a couple here in Holland, not national, but local organizations. Often you find other churchgoers, Roman Catholics and Protestants involved in those organizations. And it's a great way to meet people you otherwise wouldn't meet who, like you, share a passion for earthkeeping because of their Christian faith.
It's kind of sad that the reputation of Christians is people that don't like to take care of the earth, which is, our the first mandate to go and take care of the earth. This is why I put you here. Do it. It's yours. So I find that really sad. I think this last year has been the hottest year on record.
It's true.
So it feels to me, as we are experiencing climate change, as the earth is getting hotter, a lot of people, I think, especially in America, so we get afraid, we're fearful, we're like, I'm scared of what's happening. So it paralyzes us to actually engage because we're afraid. But what is giving you hope in the place of earthkeeping? Even when we are rising in temperature, the earth seems to be groaning at the moment.
Yeah, the earth groaning, St. Paul's metaphor from Romans chapter 8. I use that all the time. That's a great question. I teach at Hope College. I love that name, faith, hope, and love, right? The three great theological virtues that St. Paul, among others, alerts us to. And hope is a confident expectation of some future good. That's a kind of generic definition of hope. I talk about this in one of my books, Earthkeeping and Character, where I focus on ecological virtue ethics from a Christian point of view. And hope is really a really important virtue, because if we don't have hope, then we're going to do nothing. The opposite of hope, the contrary, the vice, is despair. Desperare, absence of hope. Our motto here at Hope College is spera in Deo. The Latin term, again, is hope. Esperanza, Spanish for hope. So hope is huge. We need to have some confidence in some good future. And as Christians, our hope does not rest in our human intelligence or our, fancy technology. It rests in a faithful God, a God of hope, a God who gives us hope because the future, God's good future, is in God's hands and not in ours. If I believed it was in my or your or our hands, I'd be pretty despairing because we tend to screw things up. So having hope because Jesus rose from the dead. He's no longer in a tomb. I mean, that's the ultimate basis of Christian hope, is the resurrection and ascension of Jesus after his death. Our hope is in God, and what gives me hope is ultimately that. But I look around and I see a lot of 20, 30-somethings, the kids I teach at Hope College and elsewhere, who are hopeful because they see reality, but they're doing things. There are the equivalent of the Green Team. That's what our nickname for the Campus Sustainability Advisory Committee here at Hope College. Every campus I go, there's something equivalent to that. And courses I teach, students 18 to 25-year-olds are pretty aware of global climate change because it's happening in their community. All those hot temperatures and so on, the sorts of things we've been experiencing the last year, they're very aware of, but they're also getting involved in organizations that are trying to fight climate change, and they see real progress. So that gives them hope that the world isn't going to hell in a handbasket, that enough people are waking up and acknowledging the reality of the global climate emergency, climate crisis. Those are the words I've been hearing more in my looking at websites and being in email chats and so on. It's no longer climate change, it's climate crisis, climate emergency. And if there's any good that's come out of this last year of all these climate issues we've experienced, it's maybe that a larger group of people are waking up to the reality of what is indeed climate emergency. But, they're waking up. So, again, the younger crowd is, I think, way ahead of us older folk in many ways in recognizing the reality of this and realizing that they want to do something. That do something to improve the world that we older folks have maybe left them. I sense some despair about what we older folks can do. They say, "Well, look at the earth you've left for us. Get out of here and let us let us take over here. So I think there's a lot of room for hope in simply the awakening of a younger generation to acknowledge that the world is that they are inheriting from us needs their help, and they can't just sit on their hands and do nothing, nor do they want to. And that's, again, see that in lots of different ways with different organizations and students participating in, whether they're in an organization or not, just participating in creation care activism of various sorts. And a lot of organizations, again, Biologos being only one, but many others, Arosha, et cetera, Christian organizations in particular, who are appealing to a lot of young people. And the young folks are finding their people in these groups, even if it's only, at least for starters, only online.
Good. I have just a couple questions here at the end. One, if you could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Oh, boy. Resist the urge to think that because the problems are so big and we humans are so seemingly small, resist the urge to do nothing. Forget being a consequentialist. Do what's right because it's the right thing to do, even if it seems like doing it would have little consequence. That's the advice I give to my 21-year-old students, and advice I would give to myself were I in their shoes today. I've written about this in a couple of my books. I have a dialogue I wrote about consequentialism and why we ought not be consequentialists. Think that the moral worth of an action is found only in its consequences. We ought to simply do the right thing. Follow Jesus, follow all the saints who said to heck with the consequences. I'll leave those to God, and I'm simply going to do what God is calling me to do and be a faithful disciple, follower of Jesus as best I can. I think that's the best advice to give, is don't think again that your actions are judged on potential future consequences. None of us have an eyeglass that can see the future. Again, some little thing we do might spur a huge positive change in our world that we had no idea about before we did that seemingly stupid little thing.
Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
I've got so many books here. So many good books on my to-read list. My students really love this book. I use it in a number of classes, The Wondrous Workings of Planet Earth, Understanding Our World and Its Ecosystems. And it just is full of these really eye-catching art drawings, all these different ecosystems about our role on planet Earth, all the different creatures. I started using it a couple of years ago, and I do my course evaluations. To a student, everyone says, keep using this book to increase ecological literacy.
Well, I highly recommend Creation Care Discipleship. So as you start to engage that and read that, what would you like readers to get out of it? What's your hope for this book?
My hope for this book is that people will get to chapter 5, living what we believe, enthusiastic, persuaded that being a Christian, part of that of discipleship is being a caretaker of creation, earthkeeper, and that they would pick just one thing from that chapter, good old chapter 5, and that would cascade into multiple things eventually that they could do, again, in their neighborhood, at home, but also joining with other people online, at church. And when the sun rises on another beautiful day, that they'll feel like they're bearing witness to God's good future of shalom in their own little way, participating as a witness to God's kingdom here on earth, God's will on earth, done on earth as it is in heaven, and and they can do that with other people and feel that creation care is part of their calling as a Christian.
Amen. Amen. How could people connect with you, get your book, and where would you like to point people to?
Well, it's published by Baker Academic, which published 2 of my earlier books. You can find it on their website. I hear now it's also on, I think, Amazon Books. It's available. Local bookstores will be getting copies in the next, if they don't already have them, in the next few weeks. But the easiest way probably is to buy it online.
Steve, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it was illuminating. It helped us really ground us into what we can actually do to care for the earth, to be earth keepers, individually and corporately as a community, what we can do to be a part of God's great earth. So thank you for this, and I really hope it inspires many people to take care of the earth, do what they can to be a part of that, and to point to God and give Him glory. And I'm really excited that we do have a part to play in the new heaven and new earth that will come. And it is not for naught that we are doing this, but there is going to be a future hope and reality that there is going to be all things made new in Christ. So thank you, Steve, for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Joshua, and God's blessings on your work. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you're really enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. You could do it right now. Just hit that little plus. And then I would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So you could go right now to the show and leave a star rating and review and let us know how you are enjoying the show. And find us on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to connect, interact, I post a lot of quotes and different things that you could actually interact with the episodes and let me know how you are enjoying the show. If you feel inclined to donate, there is a support the show link in the show notes, and it would send you directly to a page where you could donate so that new episodes can be produced for your enjoyment. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an incredible week.